At the moment, the code is working and the purpose is resolved. But at the same time, this child function syntax with the consumer component is a little complicated. In newer React or with hooks based advancements, React offers the useContext hook, which is really easy to use. The syntax is that you write const, for example, value is equal to useContext, and you give the context reference, that is the my context, or you can say the context object. Here you are passing the context object as a parameter, and it returns the current context value of the nearest my context provider, referring the component tree. Let's change the code and implement the useContext. Alright, so now in this very code, I do not need the consumer, so I will remove it. Also, we don't need the function, so let's also remove the function as well. And this return. Alright, now we are back with the code which we had earlier before the consumer component. Now let's check the output once. And you can see that in the output it shows the error because there is no such thing like total which we have returned here. Now the next step is I'm going to say const total, that is the context value, and I'm going to use the useContext hook, and it is imported on line number 1 now, and here I'm going to give the reference of the context object, that is the total context. So now let's save this. Now you see that there is no child function, there is no complicated syntax, it's just one line. You are adding the useContext hook and it should do the job. Let me just save this and go back to the output. And now you see that we have the total available for the cart as well as the total component. So here I'm going to say banana, oranges, and so on. And you see that the total is updated. Let me remind you that in cart component, still it is the consumer syntax, and in the total component, now we have used the useContext hook. So let's also correct the cart component with useContext only. So let me remove the unwanted things from this place. So I'm going to remove consumer and consumer, the end of the consumer, that is. So now we have the original component as it is. Here also we have the total that we were trying to refer. So here again I'm going to say total is equal to useContext, and that will import. And here I'll say total context. That's it. Let's just save, go back to the output. I'll refresh it. So it starts with 0. Now you see that the output with the total calculation is displayed, but now we have the useContext hook implemented at different levels. Now let's talk about few relative questions. The first question is explain the useContext hook. So this is what we have seen, that earlier we had this child function inside the consumer, and now we are using the useContext. The useContext takes the context as parameter and it returns the context value. So it's very easy, and you see the syntax in front of you, that the older way, that is the consumer way, and the useContext hook is far better and easy to deal with. The second question is, will the component using useContext hook re-render every time the context value changes? Yes, it will. The component will always re-render on context value change, and to improvise the performance, you can implement memoization, which we have already discussed in prior sections. But you do remember that you use the useContext in a component, and if there is a change in the global context, certainly it is going to re-render the component which is using the useContext hook.